Despite being the greatest bunch of chads to walk the earth, the state of the dissident right is dismal. We have the smartest minds, the best philosophies, and the best understanding of nature and power, yet we are near totally without power. Why is this, and what has to change? Watch this as I explore one aspect of organisational necessity that the right has not yet begun to crack. That aspect is specialisation. As some of my viewers will know, I recently gave a speech in Australia about the dismal state of the dissident right, wherein I tiraded against those in our sphere who do nothing to increase our power. LARPers, populists, policy guys, and those who insist on voting harder. By the way, the script of that speech is available to channel members of Baron tier or higher in my Discord, but the point is that for a while now, I have been very interested in giving the right the tools to become an organised and effective faction of power. Yet, as things stand today, we are totally failing on that front. One thing about which I could have gone into more detail in that speech, however, is that of specialisation. You see, I and many others have talked a fair bit before about the differences between an elite mindset and a non-elite mindset. And indeed, there is a fair amount of focus within our circles about cultivating a right-wing elite. However, it appears to me that we're actually failing to consider a third category which is of equal importance, which is a middle elite. Not the top elite, not the mass, but the middle. The idea of a middling elite is talked about in elite theory, so it's not like this is an idea that none of us have heard of, yet it's not one we're actively thinking about, and as far as I can tell, not one we're trying to cultivate. In any case, the pyramid of people within a faction can be represented here. Here there are the top elites, the ones who actually decide upon the direction and policies of the faction. There are the masses, who do not wield power and who are chiefly useful as a source of money and manpower, aka not intellect and not organisation, as well as this middle elite, those who are effectively the executors of the wills of the top elites. Here, think of your police officers, your petty bureaucrats, your judges, your journalists, all the things like this. Now, of course, I should mention that the pyramid I've just shown you isn't actually to scale, and if I were to draw it to scale, it would look more like this. However, the first version I showed you is far more useful for our understanding. But now, you may be wondering why I mention all of this. Surely, we already know this, as we've been covering it for years. Well, sure, we have, but we don't exactly act like it. But what do I mean by that? Well, let's first take the example of the network of tens. The network of tens is a concept created by Academic Agent, a somewhat controversial figure these days who toys with the idea of calling himself the sensible centre-left rather than right-wing, despite, in my opinion, fully being right-wing. I think rather than me butchering what AA actually has to say on the matter, I'll simply play you the segment from his video.
There are no neutral institutions. The plebs have no say, and there is no realistic red option. There are no red elites as things stand. Actual sovereignty rests with minority special interest groups who have more power than any government. So faced with these realities, and with the realities of how power has functioned all through history in mind, what is my proposal? In 1,000 people, we might be lucky to have 1 or 2 people we might realistically say are red. All of these people who are red must be leveled up, both in terms of learning and in terms of becoming your best self. At the same time, as we grow such tens, decentralized nodes of pure redness around the world, they can network with each other, they can set up goods and services for each other, create art and culture for each other, made by tens and for tens. The first step must be to create a vanguard of tens.
But yeah, in any case, the idea of the network of tens is that we as people within a faction, if we are to succeed as a faction, become organised, become, good, viable, effective people, we must become 10 out of 10s in various different categories. If your understanding of philosophy is a 6 out of 10, you should strive to make it a 10 out of 10. If your understanding of how business operates is a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, make it a 10 out of 10. If your physical fitness is an 8 out of 10, make it a 10 out of 10. And you can take whatever category you want, but 10 out of 10s need to be 10 out of 10s in every important category. This creates a vanguard of elites. These are the people who will lead the faction into power. And indeed, there are many people within our sphere who truly are 10 out of 10. You have the work of Scrump and Evelyn, who are perhaps the only people autistic enough to actually do the research into all the regime policy papers and think tank documents, such that they literally can predict the political future, because all of this is telegraphed in advance. And you have many other people who've read all of Nietzsche, all of Spengler, all of Evola, all of Carl Schmitt, all of elite theory. So many people who are so capable, so intelligent, and absolute 10 out of 10s. And for all of these people who are part of this vanguard of elites, they're absolutely bloody brilliant. Yet we still do not have power and don't appear to be making really any serious power moves. So what is the problem? You see, as good as the network of 10s and reading all these books and doing research is for the individual, it actually completely fails to cultivate a middling elite. And indeed, in Academic Agent's video, The Network of 10s, he talks about how whenever something becomes not a 10 out of 10, whenever things start to decay, that's when it becomes ripe for infiltration. So as he sees it, you either have your 10 out of 10s or you have your plebeians.
And as soon as something becomes mass or plebeian, it will deviate from its core and dilute itself and open itself up to subversion. This is a point the distributors made.
However, I totally disagree. I think that the middle elites of any factions are never 10 out of 10. It's important enough that they have, enough of a grounding, enough of a basic understanding of the ideas of the faction that they're not going to go doing foolish things or be corrupted by, some outside influence, whatever have you. But I suppose my issue with Academic Agent's approach is that, by and large, it's quite a purist academic approach, which for a vanguard is useful, yes, but not for a large faction. You see, if the goal of the dissident right is academic excellence or truth-seeking, then yes, we've already won. We've beaten everyone else, we are the best, pat ourselves on the back, we've done it, boys, let's all go home now. However, in my opinion, that should not be the goal of the dissident right, of the true right, of whatever we wish to call ourselves. Instead, I think the goal, absolutely and obviously, should be to seek power. And then from this, it's simply a matter of reality, something dictated even by the IQ distribution, for example, that not everyone will be or can be a 10, but also not everyone needs to be a 10. Let's say that our faction decides that it's very important to have a payment processor independent of the regime. So for this, we need to have a website, we need people to code, we need people with a lot of technical experience. These people who we need to have technical experience, these coders, let's just call them, do they really need to know the nuanced differences between a Nietzschean view and a Spenglerite view? Do they need to have read Evola? Do they need to have read the entirety of Carl Schmitt? No, they just need to know enough to be on our side and then be experts in their fields. They need to be specialists. And then, as long as you have these specialists, as long as they are loyal to us and their interests align with the factional interests, then we can benefit from their expertise knowledge and expertise skill without them having to be absolutely brilliant on every category there is. Or let's take another example with researchers. If everyone in the sphere was encouraged to individually read through all the very long and boring policy documents, all the hostile regime news outlets, whatever else have you, to try and find what the regime is planning, this would take up an insane amount of time. If everyone had to do this, it simply wouldn't be viable. So, rather than everyone having to do this, I think it's far more effective as an organisation, as a faction, that only a small number of people who are very good at the job do these things. For example, you have Scrump and Evelyn doing this work. If you had, maybe a dozen or so more people doing that work, we could have a team of people who read through all the policy documents, who could then produce a very digestible newspaper or something else to be circulated among the people within our sphere, saying, this is what the regime plans to do, these are the people pushing it, these are the lines they're probably going to push, such that we can then plan around that, get ahead of it, and, do things that benefit us in relation to what's going to be done to us. But we don't need tens of thousands of people doing this all individually and then all likely reaching slightly different conclusions. We just need things to be mostly correct, done by people who are very competent, such that we can then be given, the Cliff Notes version and then get on with our lives and do something else that's useful and necessary for our faction. This is something that Henry Ford discovered. Specialization is something that massively increases efficiency. If you just have people doing one or two small tasks or tasks in a small field and everyone is siloed into these groups and that's what they do, efficiency massively improves and you can get a lot more done. And to an extent I feel like this is so obvious that I don't know why I'm having to say it, yet still there are a lot of people in our sphere, especially the influencers, and typically those influencers who have read 1,000 bloody books, who think that we should be reading 1,000 books each because that's what they've done and that's what made them successful and given them their understanding. But no, we should be specializing for the sake of efficiency, such that more can be done by the people who are competent in those roles. This is absolutely obvious to anyone who's spent any amount of time thinking about the matter, yet the right as a faction does not behave as though this is the case. And that is a total failure in our organisational capacity as a faction. And of course, I could talk more about what roles are necessary as a power faction, and for the sake of it, I'll put this image up on screen. This is Academic Agent's model of the octopus, which talks about various groups within the regime. Although this isn't necessarily roles in the same way, you still have your things like the chest, the brain, the judiciary, whatever have you, and all the people within these things are specialists. This works very well for the regime, who is hostile to us, and so we too should be taking this approach. But yes, I could talk more and more about specialization, how it's beneficial, but I don't need to beat the dead horse. Specialization can help us in a lot of ways. As a faction, we're large enough that we can have people specialize. We can have researchers reading through policy documents and producing concise, digestible breakdowns of what the regime's planning to do. And to an extent, we already have this, but it needs to become more formalized. We do have people who are coders, and that's what they're doing for organizations within our sphere. But again, we need more people to be doing that. We need more volunteers. And, if you are interested in becoming a volunteer and doing these very useful specialist tasks, especially coding, then I recommend you reach out to the Beowulf Foundation, to which I'll provide a link below. But yes, I think I've made my point. We need to become more specialist. We don't need to be purists. People don't need to have read all these books, know all this niche philosophy. We just need to be good enough and have good enough an understanding that we know who we are, we know what we want is power. We need to know pragmatically what is the best approach to gaining power in this moment, and yes, we need to specialize. Anyway, thank you for listening. Like and subscribe, join my Discord, support me in whatever way you want to. Have a nice day, I'll see you in the next one, and lastly, cheerio. The Middle East. Once a backwater given little to no regard, now the source of great geopolitical upheaval. But how did this come to pass? This book, The 13th Power, lays bare the history of what really happened. Read to learn how the great powers of old were usurped by the powers of new, and how a rising 13th power, international finance, threatens to establish a one-world government. This is The 13th Power by the legendary Major General Richard Hilton. Buy it now at wilfings.com.